All right, everyone. I want to talk to you about libraries. I think library science is so important to academia and also so important for the preservation of gaming. And we suck at funding libraries. Like, funding for libraries gets cut in the US anytime anything gets cut in the budget in Congress. It's horrible. Libraries are like fundamentally how we preserve information for future generations. That's why there is a whole science behind the cataloging and preserving of this information. And a couple people have asked questions about how this pertains to gaming. Well, I bet you don't know that libraries are in court right now fighting the fight to preserve video games. Unfortunately, recently had a major setback. Software Preservation Network and the Library Copyright Alliance recently brought up a case with the U.S. Copyright Office to allow libraries to digitally lend games for study over the internet. They lost that legal fight, but they are advancing that up the court. They're figuring out the next legal strategy as we speak. In 2018, librarians from the Museum of Art and Digital Entertainment fought and won a case that made it legal to obtain a dead game's server code and local code. The Acting Register found that the record supported granting an expansion in the relatively discrete circumstances where a preservation institution legally possesses a copy of a video game's server code and the game's local code. The record indicated that an exemption would enable future scholarship by enabling researchers to experience games as they were originally played and thereby better understand their design or construction. Now, unfortunately, you would have to be playing these games at a preservation site. There are efforts to expand preservation sites to mean obtainable over the internet, like the previous case that I mentioned. It is an ongoing fight. Yeah, because of the archivists in MADE, you can just legally obtain server code and local code for any dead game when it goes dead. Now, I'm going to mention a lot of other digital library initiatives, but I want to make a point here. This is a very hard fight. Libraries are taking more losses in courts than they are getting wins, largely because they just don't have the money that big corporations have. So if you have any money that you can spare, think about donating to these initiatives. Or if you have time that you can spare, volunteer to help out. Heck, just donating old game collections goes a huge way. Now, for some other digital library initiatives and what they're doing. First, you have the American Library Association. They're kind of a good catch-all. They're advocating for the right to put video games in libraries and preserve them in several different states, including while the games are still being played. And they detail many of the obstacles that they have to face in the current legal system and what you can do to help. Game On takes a people-oriented approach. We're very active during the pandemic in connecting people through video games. They believe the preservation of these games serves as a way to connect people together. Video Game History Foundation is one of the most accomplished museums of video game history. They kind of take the angle of preserve first and argue later, meaning some of the stuff they do is in a legal gray area, but it's been working. I had to refresh myself on this one on Wikipedia, but the National Digital Information Infrastructure and Preservation Program. Look, it's a lot of words. Anyway, that's an effort by the Library of Congress, who is currently being attacked by the Trump administration, so again, needs your support. They're helping institutions like the Internet Archive. They haven't done much since 2018 because we keep defunding libraries. They have several programs specifically for video games and also other things such as the business side of the internet. Those old, GeoCities pages. One thing that you might like to look into is their Preserving Virtual Worlds initiative. This looks to preserve anything that could be considered a virtual space well after the place dies. So, for example, Second Life is one thing that they've mentioned, but also Fortnite, because Fortnite has, social gathering events. A lot of efforts are going to be dependent on your region. The National Film and Sound Archive of Australia has their own video game section for archival. Cambridge, there's the Center for Computing History, which not only logs old video games, but the ways we used to play them, old computers. They have their own initiatives in place to try and get server backups of online games so that we can continue to play them after they go dead. They've managed to resurrect some of the earliest online games, like multi-user dungeons and mucks and stuff like that, and that's real cool. The National Video Game Museum has been very active in trying to preserve live service games. They have extra support from Randy Pitchford, CEO of Gearbox, and they have some of the best interactive exhibits that I've ever seen. National Video Game Museum also has something called the Video Game Heritage Society, which is specifically looking to put together a team of specialized archivists and legal experts in order to fight legal battles in the US and the UK, fighting against corporations that are against preservation efforts, fighting for the right for the code of dead games to be available to the public, for them to be able to mod it, host their own servers, so on and so forth. But it's a tough battle, they still need help. In Japan, there's the Game Preservation Society, which works out of Tokyo. They're actually way further ahead than other preservation efforts. They are currently in danger of being shut down. So again, all your support matters. Now, this video is getting a little long, but there are so many more. So I'm going to rapid fire off a couple that you could easily search up yourself. There's the Strong Institute in Rochester, New York, National Software Reference Library. In partnership with Activision, EA, and Valve, has gotten a lot of the code for very popular games, such as Call of Duty, Team Fortress 2, Hong Kong Game Association in Hong Kong, Museum of Digital Art and Entertainment in Oakland, California, Embracer Group Archive, the Sid Bolton Collection. There's Flashpoint for the preservation of all those Adobe Flash games that are now no longer supported. And here's two more that I want to go into a little bit more in depth. First is just Good Old Games. Good Old Games goes through hell to get old games playable on new systems. And they're probably the only digital storefront that actually works with digital libraries. So good on them. And finally, I want to point you toward Retro Reversing, which is not a library in and of itself, but is an archive of decompiled retail console games. For those of you who don't know what a decomp is, it's basically taking the code that was originally meant to run, say, on an N64 and transforming it into more generic code that can be run on computer systems with modern-day graphics cards. While the decompilation movement is not necessarily a preservation effort, libraries are storing decompiled games in their archive. And since this is a relatively new legal area, this has been a way that they've been able to bypass some of the legal bumps. Just saw that I passed the 6-minute and 40-second mark on my video, so I'm sure you're tired of hearing me blabbing. As always, please support digital library initiatives. They are very important for preserving the history of gaming. Doesn't matter which one you support, pick one that you think looks the coolest. Any support is good support.